The music had just started when I felt it. Not fear, not sadness. Just that sharp, still feeling like something had shifted an inch to the left and no one else noticed. I was standing at the edge of the orchard near the fence where the trees thinned out, watching Emma walk toward the wedding arch. Her dress moved with the wind like it remembered childhood summers. And then I saw the woman. Worn dress, hair too long, eyes locked on mine like she'd been walking through 10 years just to reach this spot. I knew her face, because it used to be mine. Before I go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if stories like this have ever brushed past your own family, your hometown, or your gut tap subscribe, every voice helps pull one more truth back into the light. My name's Rachel Moore. I'm 34 now, but most people still think I died when I was 24. I grew up just outside Boise, Idaho, one of those quiet counties where the hills are dusted with pine, and the post office still shares a parking lot with the diner. We had a split-level house with creaky steps and a garden my mother kept blooming every spring no matter what kind of winter we'd had. Before the accident, before they buried someone under my name, I worked night shifts at St. Luke's doing rounds as a new nurse covering for people who couldn't make it in. I didn't party, I didn't travel. I had goals and structure. I had a family that knew how to function on the surface. My mom was warm the glue. Emma was still in school full of questions and always stealing my sweaters. And my dad, well, Gregory Moore, was a statue. Not unkind, just unreadable. Served as sheriff for almost 20 years. The kind of man who showed love by reminding you to change your oil on time. Back then I thought I understood what safe meant. That if you followed the rules, paid your dues, told the truth, nothing would happen to you. But there were signs. Small things that didn't add up. The same dark sedan parked across the street 3 times in 1 week. A phone call with no voice on the line. The mailbox left open even though I swore I shut it. I told Emma once. She said it was probably stress. I told Mom. She rubbed my shoulder and said, "Your mind's just tired, baby." The night before the crash, I stayed late to finish charts. Left around 11. The air was thick with wildfire smoke even though the fires were 100 miles off. I remember the headlights too bright too close, and then nothing. At least that's what they said. The fire had burned too much for them to find anything whole. They used dental records to say goodbye. Closed casket. A necklace missing. 10 years passed. Emma graduated. Mom died. Dad quit the sheriff's office and stopped speaking in full sentences. And I disappeared. But on the day Emma stood in her lace gown under a sky the color of old photographs, someone began walking down the gravel path. She wasn't invited. She wasn't listed on the seating chart. She just kept walking calm barefoot, eyes wide open. And when I stepped into that orchard, every sound, the laughter, the music, the rustle of leaves, fell silent. That's when everything began to unravel. I didn't say anything at first. No one did. The air held its breath. I could still feel the gravel beneath my feet, still hear the faint echo of the wedding music. Only now it sounded distant, like it was playing from another time. Emma was standing just beyond the arch, the bouquet fallen at her feet, her hands frozen mid-motion. Her eyes were locked on mine, but she didn't move. It was as if the entire orchard, the guests, the trees, even the wind had paused to catch up with what they were seeing. I felt the weight of every stare, every whisper forming behind me as I walked closer. I saw the disbelief in their faces. Some of them turned away. One woman dropped her champagne glass. And then I spoke. I said the only thing I could manage, "I'm sorry I missed the last 10 years. I didn't plan those words. They just came." I saw Emma's mouth move, but no sound came out. And then Gregory appeared, red-faced, moving quickly through the guests, his voice rising above the murmurs, demanding answers no one had. Lucas stepped in front of Emma like he was shielding her from something dangerous. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't there to hurt anyone. I raised my hand slow, like that could prove something. I'm not here to ruin anything I said. I just didn't know where else to go. He didn't believe me. I saw it in the way he stared hard and cold, like trying to find a crack in a mask. "Rachel Moore is dead," he said. "I buried her myself." I reached into my pocket. My fingers shook. The necklace felt smaller than I remembered, a little rusted, the ballerina charm still dangling mid-spin. I held it out. "No, I told him you buried someone else." Emma saw it before he did. Her hand went to her mouth. She knew. She remembered. It was the necklace she gave me the night before the accident. No one else would have known that. I saw her knees buckle a little, like her body understood before her mind did. Someone guided us inside. I didn't notice who. The wedding stopped. Guests scattered. Someone took the music off loop, but I kept hearing that last chord in my head. Inside the house, nothing had changed. The hallway walls still held the same family photos, graduation, Easter, the 4th of July, cookout. There was one of us in the back of Dad's truck, maybe 10 and 12, our hair tangled from the wind, my hand holding Emma's. That was the last summer that still felt whole. Emma sat at the kitchen table in silence. Gregory stood by the window phone to his ear. "We need a DNA test," he said. "This doesn't make sense. People don't just come back from the dead." Then I started talking. I don't remember deciding to. The words just came. I told them I woke up in a clinic 2 years after the crash. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know who I was. They told me my name was Mara. I was kept medicated most of the time. Disoriented. I didn't have ID. No visitors. No windows that opened. No clocks. I believed them. For years. Until a nurse left a high school yearbook on the night desk during a shift. I don't think she meant to, but I saw a photo of my own face. My real name. Rachel Moore. Something cracked open after that. I started remembering pieces. A smell. A voice. The way the walls of the clinic curved at the corners. I planned my escape for weeks, and when the chance came, I took it. I walked for days, slept in churches and shelters. I took cleaning work at a roadside motel. I found a bus ticket heading to Boise that someone had left behind. I took it. I didn't know if anyone would believe me, but I had to try. Gregory didn't say anything for a long time. Then he looked at me and asked, "Where's the scar on your knee?" I didn't answer. I just bent down and rolled up my jeans. There it was, white jagged just below my right kneecap. I got it when I was 8, chasing Emma down the driveway on a bike too big for me. Emma cried when she saw it. That night, no one really slept. Gregory called the coroner's office demanding access to the old case files. Emma stayed downstairs for hours, just staring at the wedding cake still sitting in the fridge untouched. Upstairs, I sat in the guest room, my old room. It was smaller than I remembered. My bookshelf was still there. A faded sticker on one shelf said "Private, Rach only" in my handwriting. My hands kept shaking. I traced the edges of the furniture, half expecting it to vanish if I blinked. Around 3 in the morning, Emma came in. I was holding a photo of Mom, the one from the year she got sick. I whispered, "I missed her funeral." Emma didn't answer. I looked at her. I didn't even know she was gone. My hands trembled. I thought she'd be here. Emma sat beside me. She didn't say anything for a minute. Then she asked, "Who kept you from us, Ra?" I swallowed. I don't know his name, but I remember his eyes. And one thing he used to say every time I asked about my past, what she asked. He'd say, "You died. That's all you need to know." Just then, the motion sensor light outside flicked on. We both turned. Something moved between the orchard rows. I got up, fast, went to the window. Emma joined me. But by then, whatever it was, whoever it was already gone. Just shadows and wind. Emma asked, "Did you see him?" I hesitated. "See who?" "The man who told me I was dead," I said. "He used to wear a green jacket." Emma's voice dropped. "Dad used to have a green sheriff's jacket." I turned to her. My throat went dry. Emma stared at me. She didn't say another word. Neither did I. But the room felt smaller after that, and colder. The next morning, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the sugar jar like it had answers. The wind outside kept catching the edge of the porch swing, making it creak softly against the rail. Emma had gone out back to walk the orchard path, said she needed some air. Gregory hadn't come downstairs yet. The house still smelled faintly of wedding cake and wood polish, and everything felt too still. I kept thinking about the man in the green jacket, the one who told me I was dead. I hadn't seen his face in the clinic, not clearly. Just his voice, always steady, always final. But now that Emma had said it, I couldn't shake the image of Dad's old uniform, the sheriff's patch on the arm, the way he used to hang that jacket on the hook by the back door. I remembered brushing past it when I was 16, late for school, and getting a face full of dust and cold leather. I remembered him saying once, "This jacket's seen more lies than the courthouse." And now I didn't know whether to believe anything he said at all. That afternoon, Emma called the sheriff's office to ask for copies of the original case report. They told her everything was sealed, but Gregory had already put in a formal request for access. He hadn't told us that part. When she confronted him about it, he just said I needed to see it for myself. He didn't look at me when he said it. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked the hallway in socks, stopping outside the guest room, my old room, then outside Emma's door, just listening. At some point I drifted into the living room and curled up on the couch with a photo album I hadn't touched in years. It had this scratch on the spine from when Mom accidentally vacuumed the corner of it. Inside were birthdays, camping trips, a picture of me in my high school scrubs at the nursing program pinning ceremony. But what I kept going back to was a photo I didn't remember being taken. Me and Emma on the front steps. She was maybe 15 and I looked tired. Really tired. You could see it in my shoulders. I stared at that photo until the sun came up. The first real doubt came the next day when a plain envelope showed up under the front door. No name, no return address. Just a single photograph inside. It was a picture of me, or at least it looked like me, sitting upright in a hospital bed. My hair was shorter, my eyes puffy and vacant. The bottom corner had a date scrawled in pen, March 7, 2017. I hadn't even started remembering who I was until the summer of 2019. I showed Emma. She flipped it over and found a single typed sentence on the back. "You were never supposed to come back." She didn't say anything, just handed it back like it was hot to the touch. I knew that bed, knew. I remembered the striped sheets. The nurse used to call it the ocean bed. I asked for it when I couldn't sleep. That night, Gregory drove into town to check the feed from a surveillance camera across the street. It was from a hardware store that used to be one of his regulars, but the owner said the camera hadn't been working in weeks. Whether that was true or not, we never found out. When Gregory came back, he noticed something was wrong. The office door was cracked open. He always locked it. Nothing had been taken, but his laptop had been moved and one of his desk drawers was left slightly ajar. The one with the handgun. The pistol was gone. I tried not to let the others see how my hands were shaking when he told us. 2 days later, Emma got an email from an unknown sender. The subject line just said, "You're in danger." Attached was a scan of what looked like a medical file, my medical file, but across the top in red block letters it said, "Deceased." It listed my birth date correctly, then described ongoing sedative protocol routine memory suppression and an eventual closed file discharge from a facility in Montana. The signature at the bottom was what made my stomach flip. Dr. Victor Lang. He had signed my death certificate 10 years ago. Same name, same handwriting, same man. Gregory stared at the screen like it was a ghost. When Emma asked if he'd kept in touch with Lang, he said, no, not since he retired. Moved to Arizona, said the cold made his bones ache. She asked again if Lang had ever said anything strange about my case. Gregory paused longer this time, then said, it was the only one he never felt right about. That evening I sat out on the back porch with Emma. The orchard swayed gently in the wind. I was holding the ballerina necklace in my palm like it could anchor me to something. I remember Lang, I said. He came to the clinic once, just once. I was half conscious, but I knew who he was. I heard him talking to the nurse. He said he was checking on my condition, but then he looked at me, and I swear, Emma, he looked afraid. She didn't respond right away. Then she asked, do you remember anything else? Something he said? I nodded slowly. He whispered to someone near the door, we buried the wrong girl. The next morning, a black sedan was found burned out near the far edge of the orchard. Plates removed, engine still warm. The sheriff's office confirmed the model matched one used by a private transport service contracted out of Kalispell, the same town the clinic had been near. Inside, under the driver's seat, they found a syringe. That was when I stopped doubting myself. Whatever this was, whoever had kept me hidden, they knew I was back. That afternoon, I went to the backyard shed. There was a floorboard near the corner that had always creaked louder than the others. I lifted it, half hoping to find nothing. Instead, I pulled out a small metal lunchbox wrapped in a kitchen towel. Inside were photographs. Dozens. All of me. In the clinic. Some asleep, some awake, some strapped down at the wrists. At the bottom was one I didn't remember ever being taken, but it chilled me more than any of the others. Behind the glass of the narrow clinic window stood a man, broad-shouldered, barely visible, wearing a green sheriff's jacket. I brought it inside and laid it out on the kitchen table. Emma didn't say anything, just stood there with her arms folded across her chest, staring at the picture. That night, I confronted Gregory. I laid the photo down in front of him. His hands didn't move. How long have you known? I asked. He didn't answer. You told the department you buried me. You told the coroner you were sure. You told Emma I was dead. His eyes stayed on the table. I believed it, he said. I pushed the photo closer. Then explain this. He stared at it for a long time. Finally, he sat down and said quietly, I was trying to protect you both. Emma leaned in, from what Gregory whispered, from the people I used to work for. I didn't respond. Neither did Emma. But the quiet after that was worse than anything he could have said. Gregory didn't say anything else after that. He just sat at the table with his head in his hands, while Emma and I stood across from him, unsure whether to press him or leave him alone with whatever line he'd crossed a decade ago. I couldn't sleep that night. Neither could Emma. We ended up back on the porch after midnight, wrapped in old blankets, watching the trees sway like they were listening. The burned-out car had been towed by then, but its scent still clung to the air-fuel heat. Something chemical. Emma finally broke the silence. What if he's telling the truth? I knew what she meant. Not about the people he used to work for. About the kind of truth that doesn't protect the kind that strips everything down to bone. I didn't answer. I just looked at the necklace still curled in my hand. The next morning, she found me in the attic, surrounded by boxes we hadn't opened since before Mom died. I was sitting with Rachel's old backpack in my lap, the one she used in high school. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe proof I'd ever existed before the clinic. Maybe a reason not to believe what was coming next. Inside the bag was a photo strip from the county fair. Emma was 15. I was 20. We were eating cotton candy, laughing so hard one of the shots caught us mid-scream. On the back in my handwriting I'd written, "Even when I'm not around, always love you. Always." I handed it to Emma without a word. She folded it and put it in her coat pocket. Neither of us said anything else for a long time. As the week passed, I started remembering things. Nothing dramatic, just moments. The scar on my knee where I fell chasing her down the street. The time I kissed Daniel Reed behind the old water tower. The fight I had with Dad when I told him I wasn't going to take the desk job at the sheriff's office. I remembered how he stared at me then, not angry, just disappointed. I didn't understand it at the time. Now maybe I did. One memory kept returning. I was in the clinic lying in bed. Someone sat beside me. I couldn't see his face, but I knew the jacket. Green. The same shape. The same weight. He leaned in close and said, "You don't exist anymore, Rachel." His voice wasn't cruel, just certain. That night Emma and I played the old cassette again, the one from the shed. This time I listened closer. The end crackled with something faint. I heard Clara's voice, the nurse I'd trusted barely above a whisper. "Ask about Project Mirror." The next morning, a second envelope arrived. This one wasn't dropped at the door. It came through the mail addressed to me under my name. Inside was a torn page from a Bible, Psalm 88. "I am counted with them that go down into the pit. I am as a man that hath no strength." And written in the margin in red ink, "Return, and you'll wish you stayed dead." I showed it to Emma. She didn't flinch. Just took the page and slid it into a drawer. Later that day, I went walking through the orchard. The grass had grown taller than I remembered. The swing set at the edge of the clearing was rusted through and half swallowed by vines. I followed the old path toward the house and stopped near the porch. When we were kids, Emma and I buried a tin box under the steps, emergency candy, tiny notes, things only we would care about. I dug it up with my hands. Inside was a letter dated 2 days after my funeral. "Dear Ra," it said, "I don't believe you're gone. I don't care what they say. Every time the wind hits the trees, I hear your voice. Every time the light flickers, I think you're trying to talk to me. I'll never stop waiting." She signed it with a little heart like she used to. I sat on the steps and cried. That night she made up a bed for me in the room we used to share. It was still painted lavender with posters curling at the edges and a faded graduation banner hanging across one wall. I lay awake staring at the ceiling until I whispered, "What if I never remember everything?" Emma came and sat on the edge of the bed. "Then we'll remember it together," she said. And for a while, that was enough. But something still lingered, something we hadn't named yet. In the middle of the night, I heard the swing creak. I looked out the window. The orchard moved gently, but I didn't see anyone. Still, I felt it the same presence I remembered from the clinic, from that corridor with no windows, no clocks, no names. And somewhere just outside my memory, a voice repeated itself. "You don't exist anymore, Rachel." I pressed the necklace into my palm until I felt the edge of the ballerina dig into my skin. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. And whoever they were, they still thought I was gone. They were wrong. I hadn't thought about Daniel Reed in years. Not really. We'd dated briefly maybe 6 months back when I was working full-time at the hospital, and he was just getting his real estate license. It ended quietly. No screaming matches, no final goodbye, more like a slow fade, a mutual shrug. When Emma told him I was back, he didn't believe it. Showed up the next day. He looked older, a little heavier around the jaw, hair thinner at the temples. But his voice hadn't changed. He hugged me like you'd hug a distant cousin at a funeral. Polite, confused, not sure if it was the right thing to do. I didn't feel anything, just a dull awareness that we'd once been close and now we weren't. "You look the same," he said. I looked at him. "You don't." He laughed softly, almost embarrassed, then asked the one question no one else had yet dared to say out loud. "If that wasn't you in the car, then who did we bury?" I didn't have an answer, but it stuck in my head like a splinter. That evening, I walked the orchard path by myself. The sun was low, casting long shadows through the trees. There was a spot near the edge of the property where the fence had collapsed and never been fixed. It always felt like a quiet place to think. I sat for a while on one of the old boards, let the silence stretch. Then I stood and followed a line of weeds that led back toward the porch. I stopped when I reached the crawl space. When we were kids, Emma and I had a habit of hiding things under their candy notes, tiny treasures that felt too important to leave in a drawer. I reached under the steps and found it. The tin box was still there. The metal had rusted at the corners. Inside, wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag, was a folded piece of notebook paper. I opened it slowly. "Dear Ra," it read, "I don't believe you're gone. I don't care what they say. Every time the wind hits the trees, I hear your voice. Every time the light flickers, I think you're trying to talk to me. I'll never stop waiting." It was signed with a heart, and Emma's name just like she used to write it when she was little. I sat there on the porch steps for a long time, holding the letter like it was breakable. That night she cleared out the spare room and made space for both of us the way it had been before I left. The walls were still lavender, though the paint had faded to a softer gray. Posters curled at the edges. A graduation tassel still hung on a thumbtack near the doorframe. She hadn't taken any of it down. I lay on the bed while she smoothed out the sheets, then sat beside me with her legs folded under her. I looked up at the ceiling. What if I never remember all of it? She didn't say anything right away. Then she reached for my hand. Then we'll remember it together. We left the window cracked that night. The swing creaked once or twice, but I didn't get up. I stayed in bed, staring at the old ceiling fan, watching the blades catch the dim light from the hallway. The next morning, Emma was already gone when I woke up. There was coffee waiting downstairs, still warm in the pot. Gregory was in the living room, flipping slowly through a folder I hadn't seen before. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't want to know, at least not yet. I walked past him out the back door and sat on the porch steps. I was holding the necklace again. I didn't even realize I'd taken it with me. There was something heavy in the air that morning, not threatening, just expectant, like something was about to shift. Emma came back around noon with a small brown envelope tucked under her arm. It was at the bottom of Mom's things, she said, in her keepsake box. She handed it to me. Inside was a cassette tape unlabeled except for a faint scratch on one side that looked almost accidental. And tucked behind it a business card. Clara Mendez, RN. I hadn't heard that name out loud in years, but my chest tightened as soon as I saw it. I remembered her. Not her face, not exactly, but the feeling. She had been different from the others. Calmer. Soft-spoken. Once she left a book near my bed on a night shift. I think she meant to come back for it, but she didn't. That book had a yearbook inside it. That's how it started the memory, the truth. We found a thrift store on the edge of town that still sold portable tape players, the kind with the clunky buttons and battery covers that never stayed closed. We brought it home, put in new batteries, and pressed play. At first there was just static, then her voice low and grainy. "If you're hearing this, it means they've either taken me or I've run." The volume was uneven. Emma leaned closer. Clara kept talking. "I don't know who you are. I hope it's you, Rachel. I hope you found this. You were brought here under a name that isn't yours. They said you were a Jane Doe. Said you needed reprogramming. But I saw your file. I saw the other one too." Her voice shook. "There's another girl. She looks just like you. I think they're testing something. Swapping lives. Controlling memory. They called her Echo." The name didn't mean anything at first. Not until she said it again. Echo. That's what they called her. I don't know if it's her real name, but it's the one in the records. You have to be careful. They didn't just erase you. They replaced you. Emma sat back in the chair. I didn't move. Clara's voice cracked again. Go back to where it started. Not just Boise. Before that. There's something in the files. Look for Project Mirror. I left what I could in the locker at the old Greyhound station. Locker 43. Don't wait. The tape clicked off. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Then Emma looked up at me. Echo, she whispered. That's what they called her. I nodded. My voice felt small. Then maybe I wasn't the only one buried. Emma and I didn't wait. The next morning, we drove across town to the old Greyhound station, the one that had mostly been abandoned for years, except for the occasional bus heading north. Locker 43 was still there, scratched and faded, but the lock worked after a couple of tries. Inside, wrapped in a manila envelope, was a thick file labeled Project Mirror Draft 2 Confidential and a small red baby blanket that looked decades old. I recognized it the moment I touched it, though I couldn't have told you why. I handed it to Emma, who turned it over in her hands. We drove straight home. At the kitchen table, with Gregory pretending not to watch us from the living room, we opened the file. Government-style documents. Diagrams of brain scans, reports, stamped identity fragmentation, twin protocol, and 2 grainy black and white photos of infants both in hospital blankets. Under each was a name. Subject A, Rachel Moore. Subject B, Echo. The words didn't make sense at first. Then the next page listed more details, one child raised with full knowledge of self, the other monitored under controlled conditions programmed for compliance. Emma's hand went to her mouth. You had a twin. I shook my head. I don't remember a twin. But I'd always had that feeling growing up, a space beside me in photos, a missing shadow. The documents outlined timelines, state signatures, studies on trauma. At the end was a single line signed by Gregory Moore. Consent acknowledged. One subject retained. I didn't look up. I just kept reading. The file closed with a grainy photocopy of an order to terminate the program stamped with the same name we'd seen before, Dr. Victor Lang. There was a second cassette tape tucked between the pages. This one was newer, labeled only with the word Clara in block letters. We played it on the same thrift store recorder. Her voice sounded more tired this time, slower. She said, If you're hearing this, I probably failed. They took Echo because she wouldn't comply. She resisted every step. She loved Rachel you. She tried to get you out. There was a pause, some static then. They said Project Mirror was about memory, but really it was about obedience. They needed a control. Echo was supposed to disappear quietly, but she staged the crash. She took the car, she wore your jacket. She died to save you. My hands were cold by the time the tape ended. Emma reached over and turned off the player. The rest of the day moved in a kind of haze. Gregory didn't speak to us, but that evening he found us both at the dining room table, the file and the blanket and the tape laid out between us. He looked old, shoulders stooped, eyes rimmed with red. Where did you find those? He asked. I answered quietly. Locker at the bus station. It was Clara. He stood there a long time, not moving. Finally, he sat down across from me. You were born into a program. We didn't have a choice. The state picked. We got to keep you. Echo was taken. Emma's voice was sharp. The state. You let them take your daughter? Gregory put his head in his hands. Your mother tried to pull you both out. She fought for years, but the county threatened to take you both if we made noise. So we kept quiet. We pretended you never had a sister. And then, when the accident happened, when you vanished, I thought the nightmare had swallowed both of you. His voice cracked, but he didn't cry. I watched him carefully, waiting for anything that looked like remorse. I didn't see much. I stood and went to the window. Outside, the swing moved in the breeze, casting a thin shadow across the lawn. I turned the ballerina charm over in my hand. The next morning, before sunrise, I packed a bag. Emma woke as I was zipping it shut. "Where are you going?" I hesitated. "There's one place left. The program didn't start here. There's a town Elhorn. That's where they kept the early files." She grabbed my arm. "You can't go alone." I shook my head. "I need to see for myself. I need to know what they did to us. All of it." She let go. "At least take this." She pressed the cassette into my palm. "For luck." Gregory stood in the doorway as I left. He didn't try to stop me, just nodded once. The drive out of Boise was quiet. The sky was overcast, the road nearly empty. The map showed Elhorn as little more than a speck near the state line, once a mining village, now barely a ghost town. I parked by what was left of the church, white paint, peeling windows boarded. The bell tower was empty. A handprint marked the front door, faded like a smudge of ash. The hinges groaned when I pushed it open. Inside, the pews were broken, scorched in places, hymnals torn apart on the floor. At the front of the room, in place of an altar, was a trap door with a strange symbol painted on the boards. I recognized it from the project mirror files, two silhouettes facing each other perfectly mirrored. My hands shook as I pried the trap door open. The air underneath was cold metal, heavy with the smell of rust and chemicals. A narrow stairway led down. I used my phone's flashlight to see the bottom. The basement stretched out as a corridor lined with numbered doors, each with a metal plate. Room 3, room 5. I stopped at 7. The door was open. Inside was a medical chamber, a cot with straps, a cabinet of vials, a TV screen glowing blue. When I stepped in, the screen flickered. Footage started playing two small girls no older than 3 building with blocks. One was labeled Rachel, one Echo. I watched them play for a long minute. Then the screen turned to static, and a voice filled the room, low, echoing, "If you're seeing this, Rachel, you made it further than anyone thought. Project Mirror was terminated because of you, because you remembered. But before we erased everything, you saw her file. Echo was never meant to live past 7. You were the control, the one who questioned. We tried to swap you, to erase you." I backed out of the room, heart pounding. The next door was locked. Another farther down was open, filled with rows of file cabinets. I pulled one drawer and found a folder marked R. Moore. Echo Final. Medical charts, test results, a termination order signed by Dr. Lang and approved by G. Moore. I stared at my father's name for a long time, not quite feeling the ground beneath me. A sound echoed down the hall, a footstep that wasn't mine. I closed the folder and crept out. At the far end, a man stood in the shadows, tall, broad, wearing a green sheriff's jacket. He stepped forward and the light caught his face, older, gray-haired, sharp-eyed. "Dr. Victor Lang. You weren't supposed to come back," he said, his voice calm, almost kind. I took a step back. "You're supposed to be dead." He smiled. "A convenient rumor." My chest tightened. "You killed my sister." Lang shook his head. "No. Your father did." He didn't try to follow as I ran out up the stairs, out into the daylight. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys. I didn't stop driving until I saw the Boise City Limits sign. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sun was gone and the house was dark. I walked in, locked the door behind me, and finally let myself breathe. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder and the tape, staring at the names, the signatures, the impossible truth that had been waiting for me in the dark. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the file and the cassette tape, the weight of every page settling into my bones. The words termination order kept circling back, the sharp edge of my father's signature pressed into the memory. Emma came in quietly and set a mug of coffee beside me. She didn't ask what happened in Elhorn. She didn't have to. I pushed the folder toward her. "He signed it," I said, voice flat. "Dad signed the order." She sat across from me, both hands folded, her gaze never leaving my face. "He said it was to protect us," I continued, though the words tasted hollow. Emma's jaw tightened. Who gets to decide that I opened the folder again, scanning the columns of dates, codes, initials? At the bottom, Dr. Victor Lang's name appeared, the familiar spidery handwriting. I remembered his eyes in the clinic, cold but afraid. We sat in silence. The house around us felt like it was holding its breath. Later that morning, we confronted Gregory. There was no shouting, no scenes, just the slow unraveling of what little trust we still held. He admitted everything. The program, the agreement, the impossible choices. He said he'd tried to keep us safe, but all I heard was silence. "You told us Echo never existed," I said. "You told us I was the one who died." He didn't deny it. Sometimes, he whispered, the truth does more harm than a lie. Emma turned away, pressing the heel of her hand to her eyes. For the rest of the day, we moved through the house like strangers. I found myself returning to the photo of two little girls in hospital blankets, labeled Subject A and Subject B. I wondered if Echo had my smile, my laugh, if she was braver than I'd ever been. That night, I couldn't stay still. I needed to know if Clara had survived, if anyone else remembered. I went online searching for old nurses' registry support groups, anything with a trace of her name. The address I found was in Oregon, a women's shelter tucked behind a thrift store on a quiet street. I left Emma a note. I drove all night, windows cracked just enough for the air to feel sharp against my skin. The shelter was clean but tired, its welcome sign faded by rain. I asked the receptionist for Clara Mendez. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Third floor end of the hall. I climbed the stairs, my heart beating slow and heavy. Clara opened the door before I knocked. Her hair was streaked with gray. Her face thinner, but her eyes were the same. She stared at me, then reached out and hugged me tight. We stood in the hallway for a minute, neither of us speaking. When we finally sat down, I told her everything. She listened, hands folded in her lap, eyes shining but dry. "I never stopped hoping you'd remember," she said quietly. "Echo loved you, you know. She was the one who fought. She was the one who found the files, who planned the escape. The fire wasn't an accident. Echo started it to cover your disappearance. She gave her life so you could live." My chest ached. I thought of the empty grave, the name on the stone, the years that had been stolen from us both. Clara told me Project Mirror had ruined dozens of lives, but only 2 sisters survived childhood. "Echo was meant to be erased," she said. "You were supposed to replace her." I asked Clara if she would come forward. She agreed. We gathered what evidence we could, copies of the files, recordings, photos, the original tapes. I reached out to Helen Stokes, a journalist in Boise known for exposing hidden programs and cold cases. She listened to my story with the patience of someone who'd heard too many stories that didn't have happy endings. When the story broke, it spread faster than any of us expected. Headlines called it "The Case of the Buried Twin." Dr. Lang was arrested at his home in Arizona. Several others were named, and federal investigators launched an inquiry. Gregory resigned from public life, disappeared into a quiet retirement far from Boise. Emma stood by my side through the interviews. The court dates the hours in rooms with fluorescent lights and coffee gone cold. She never left. When the time came, we held a real memorial for Echo. No cameras, no speeches. Just family, Clara and me. A new stone was set, this one with her name, the year she was born, the year she died. I placed a single white lily at the grave. I thought of all the times I'd heard her humming in dreams, never knowing whose voice it was. I whispered, "You can rest now." The wind rustled the grass. When we left, Clara hugged me again, her hand shaking as she pressed the ballerina charm into my palm. "She would want you to have this," she said. That night, I wrote Echo's name in my journal, over and over, letting the ink sink in until my hand cramped. It was the first time in my life that I felt real, and the first time I knew that the truth, as hard as it was, belonged to us now. The weeks that followed blurred together. Some days the phone rang off the hook, reporters, attorneys, old friends I barely remembered from school. Other days the house was silent, each room shadowed by the quiet knowledge of everything that had come to light. Emma and I spent hours together, sometimes talking, sometimes not moving through the small routines of living as if those habits could knit us back into the people we used to be. The trial made headlines for a while. Helen Stokes did more interviews than I ever wanted, but she kept her promises. She protected the people who needed protecting. Dr. Lang's arrest was quick. He looked so small and gray when they showed his picture on the news, not at all like the man who'd haunted my nightmares. There were other names in the files, other hands in the cover-up, and federal investigators dragged it all into daylight. Some of those men and women never saw a courtroom. Others lost their jobs. A handful just disappeared, like Gregory, who resigned his position and quietly left Boise before the end of the year. Emma stayed. I don't know what I would have done if she hadn't. She was steady in court, calm when the questions circled too close, fierce in every statement she gave. For a while, the house was full of boxes, evidence documents, old cassettes, legal notices. I kept most of it locked away, but I couldn't bring myself to hide the file marked Echo. Every morning, I passed it on the sideboard, and every morning I'd rest my hand on it just for a second. Sometimes I wondered if she'd want that, if Echo would want her story to end in headlines or in silence. I tried not to make up answers for her. Instead, I focused on the memorial. It took weeks of arguing with the county, months of petitioning state officials, but eventually they let us do what we needed. We had Echo's remains moved to the family plot, the one where I'd been buried in name only. We held the service on a cloudy Tuesday morning. No reporters, no speeches, just Emma Clara, a handful of people who'd seen the truth and didn't look away. Clara brought a single white lily and placed it on the grave. Emma wrote Echo's name in careful, even letters on the new headstone. I stood there for a long time listening to the wind and the distant hum of traffic on the main road. I remembered Echo's voice from the tapes, the soft humming the way she always finished my sentences in old home movies. For a long time I'd wondered if I was the ghost haunting my own life. Now I saw how wrong that was. Echo was the one who'd been forgotten, the one who'd been erased. Giving her a name, a place, a memory that would outlast us both, there was nothing more important than that. After the memorial, I started writing again. Nothing for the news or for Helen's articles, just pages for myself. Emma read them sometimes, sitting across the table at night with her tea growing cold. She never critiqued, never pressed. "It's good to let it out," she'd say, "even if no one ever reads it but us." The city's noise faded, replaced by a routine that was slower, quieter. Emma returned to teaching. I took a job counseling women who'd survived similar things, women who had lost years to programs and institutions that never should have existed. Clara stayed in Oregon, but she called every week sometimes just to talk about the weather, sometimes to check in on us both. She was the only other person who remembered Echo as more than a footnote. The world eventually moved on. Headlines shifted. New scandals took over. The phone stopped ringing. When I visited Echo's grave on the anniversary of her death, I brought a yellow rose and sat on the grass until dusk. I read her a letter, just a few lines about what I remembered, what I hoped she might remember too. It was the kind of goodbye that never really feels finished. As I drove home that night, the roads empty and the windows fogged with cold air, I realized the story would always echo first in me, then in Emma, then in every person who had ever felt invisible or buried by someone else's choices. The truth had come out, but healing was slower. It didn't feel like victory. It felt more like breathing after holding your breath for too long, necessary, but never easy. Emma started planning a small gathering for the following spring just for family and the few friends who'd stood by us. She wanted to plant a tree near Echo's grave, for new roots, she said. I nodded. I didn't know if I believed in closure, but I believed in honoring what Echo did, what she gave up, what she saved. Sometimes late at night I would sit on the porch swing and listen for that old, soft humming. It wasn't there anymore, not in the way it used to be. But every now and then I'd feel the weight of the necklace in my palm, the ballerina charm spinning in the dark, and I'd remember. She hadn't vanished. She was finally seen. And that was something neither time nor silence could erase. The months after the trial felt both quieter and heavier, like the world had shifted its weight. Most days, Emma and I slipped into routines that looked almost ordinary, from the outside coffee in the kitchen laundry folded, and put away a new plant by the window that we tried to keep alive. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of the old file with Echo's name on it and pause, letting my fingers rest on the cover before moving on. Gregory never returned to Boise. Word reached us through a friend that he'd settled in a small town up north, keeping to himself. I didn't call. I didn't need to. Forgiveness wasn't a word we used much in our family, but the ache he left behind was something I learned to live around like a door that no longer closed all the way. Clara sent postcards, now and then photos of Oregon Rain, a dog she'd adopted from the shelter. Each note was simple. No mention of the clinic, the program, or Echo. I think she wanted to remind us that life could be gentle even after all we'd seen. Emma's strength kept us moving forward. She hosted small dinners, brought neighbors together for the first time in years. On quiet afternoons, she'd sit with her tea and reread the letters I'd written to Echo, tracing the words with a steady hand. I found my own kind of healing in listening to others, counseling women who'd lost themselves to other people's secrets, helping them rebuild from splinters and half-truths. Some mornings I'd walk out to Echo's grave with a fresh flower and talk to her like she was just beyond the fence. I told her about the new book I was writing about the girls I'd met who were learning to trust their own stories. I told her how grateful I was for every day I woke up and remembered my own name. I never tried to answer the questions that would never have answers, not about what we lost or who we might have been if things had gone differently. Instead, I focused on what we still had: a name restored, a truth unearthed, the chance to begin again with eyes open. Sometimes healing doesn't look like justice. Sometimes it looks like the quiet kindness you give yourself on a hard day, or the way you choose to remember someone, not for how they died, but for the life they tried to give you. I hope Echo knows wherever she is that her voice matters, that her courage did more than just save me, it made me real. So if you've listened this far, thank you for carrying this story with me. If it settled somewhere in your heart, I hope you'll take a moment to share a memory, a name, or a lesson you won't let be buried. We keep each other alive one story at a time.